And we're going to go to the mighty Three Lions. Now, obviously, the games weren't the biggest headlines, really. Albania and Latvia, 2 games that England, without sounding too arrogant, should be winning fairly comfortably. And thankfully they did. So, the silver linings. But the main talking point for me, I think, is Thomas Tuchel heading into this, his first games under his reign, his team selections, his attitudes. And I think I want to kick off with the fact that I really like it's a short-term contract, right? It is until the end of the World Cup, right? Like on Football Manager, the second the World Cup ends, all the managers just get fired from international teams. That's the deal, right? The second England get knocked out of the World Cup, or if they win it, his contract's terminated. And I think this gives him a real liberation. I think this gives him a real, we talked about if it was and we never had any issues with him being German, right? I want to clear that straight away. But we knew that the newspapers were going to have a field day with him being German, right? So I think the fact that it's a short-term contract also helps him with that, because he doesn't need to care he doesn't need to care about if the media like him or not. He doesn't have to give a fuck. He doesn't have to try and make friends. He can just do what he wants to do. And then I'm out. Hopefully there's a statue when I'm leaving, right? And I think this gives him a real strength. And I think we've seen this straight away from his team selection, but also from his interviews.
Yeah.
Because he's just been super direct. He said after the first game, which was Albania, he said, I want to see more from the wingers. The wingers weren't doing enough. They need to be providing more and doing more in the game. I don't think we'd have ever heard Gareth Southgate saying anything that honest. Because he was much more diplomatic. He was a diplomat. He was very good at that part of management. And a lot of his lines have been very honest and very no, this is what I think. Even when he was asked about Maresca, has said Reece James could be a midfielder, and he was like, I do not agree. There's no part of him. And he has this reputation in all his previous jobs. This is why he falls out with people as well, right? And it's why players love him, because he's super fucking direct. He's super honest. He says what he thinks. Adam, I don't know about you, but I've never liked him because he's never been in charge of a team that I've liked. But all of a sudden, I'm in love with the bloke. I just can't. His interviews are incredible. I love his attitude.
Yeah, and it's his breakdown of a lot of the kind of, you can see behind the kind of reporters or the journalists kind of question that they're trying to seek something out of the answer, but he's not giving into it. He's just giving it straight. And I think that what was quite refreshing is the likes of Rob Dorset, who reports for Sky Sports, saying if he'd asked that question to Southgate, he would have got maybe a vague answer, whereas Thomas Tuchel kind of gave him a more kind of precise and breakdown that he wasn't anticipating, that he didn't know how to follow it up. And I think that was quite refreshing.
He answered the question.
Yeah, exactly. He gave an answer, and he gave him more detail than he actually anticipated. And I think, to your point as well, there's been a lot of talk about how the players are feeling, and rightly, he has annoyed a few players because he's not picked them, for example. But he doesn't care, to your point. He doesn't care because he's going to be on that kind of principle of, he wants to build on what Gareth Southgate achieved, which is right. But he also wants to make sure that England are playing in a style of football that can actually go that next step ahead. And I think we already identified this off the back of the last tournament, that we felt that Thomas Tuchel was the right candidate. We got slated for it, by the way.
We did.
But
we did. Yeah.
Look, no one's kind of slating it now, are they, after these 2 games? And yes, they were easy opponents, it's fair to say. But I think if we'd seen this under Gareth Southgate, I think we're talking about a 1-0 victory or 2-0 victory at best, and we'd have shut up shop and maybe made it a bit harder for ourselves. Whereas here, I think he even reflected on the facts of, even when they were playing well, there's factors within the game where he wasn't happy. He wants to improve on that thing. And I don't think we would have heard that kind of commentary or maybe self-narrative from Southgate about his players, because he was too much about being their best mates. Whereas Thomas Tuchel is all about, I want to win by a certain style of football. And you can see there was, even in that kind of second half against Latvia, when he brought in the players like Eze, for example, they seem to have a sense of freedom that they didn't necessarily have under Southgate. So I've been pleasantly surprised, because I think I was expecting this to be quite boring games, in fairness, but I think it was refreshing. Yes, there's things to learn about this squad as well at the same time, but actually it was enjoyable, and I didn't switch off in these games, so that's a plus point, Rory.
No, well, absolutely. I never watch England World Cup qualifiers usually because we win and they're just dull as dishwater. But honestly, I think a lot of the football, and obviously, I have to say, Latvia were better than I thought they were going to be. I was really impressed with how organised and how defensively pretty stubborn they were until the second goal went in and then it kind of snowballed a little bit. But I think the fact that England were patient and continued and were like some of the link-up play, especially between Bellingham, Miles Lewis-Skelly, Rashford, like the triangles we were getting there. I love that Declan Rice is stepping up into a much more important role in this team. I think Tuchel is really putting a lot of the responsibility on him of like, you are our midfield general. You need to do everything. I really love that. I think there was some really entertaining football. And Andrea, he did say after he was asked about Southgate at the Euros, and he said, well, England didn't have a style of play. Like he was asked, did England have a style of play during the tournament? He said, no, not really. So you can see that like his main objective is win the World Cup, right? But it's very important for him to be like, in my way, in my style. And it looks like the players are kind of enjoying it and enjoying him. And even if he has annoyed them, like with Morgan Gibbs-White, he makes a little joke on the phone call, like, do you still hate me? Like, it feels like the players are kind of enjoying it so far after 2 games, right?
Yeah, and I think he's almost trying to give that kind of club feel to the national team, which I think is a nice idea, but also you don't want to go too much into that because I think the diplomacy that Southgate showed, I think, is important to have as well in the national team. I think you need a bit of both. But it's good to see, and I think he's every right to say that because I think that was always the problem with England, that they were too much focused on balanced and being in a strict unit between the lines, etc. But now it's like Rashford should be taking on his man, Foden should be taking on his man. There should be more ideas, more passages of play that we see in the Premier League, for example. So I think he's saying the right thing. It's just implementing it. But I guess you can kind of see in the play as well. I think what I kind of noticed the most, I think, despite it being difficult, they're playing 2 teams playing low block. I think the way they kind of just were quite comfortable on the ball, I thought was quite different because I think it gave me that European vibe, like a Spanish team that that where they can control the game and look kind of comfortable, but also look quite classy on the ball as well. And I think that was quite a nice look that England had. I would say that kind of stood out for me, as well as obviously the goals and stuff they scored. But I think that's the kind of thing they're going to transition to because I think the mentality of England has always been kind of rigid, but also like panicky stations and stuff like that. But they do have the players, the qualities to have that different side to them where they can control the game, they can dominate, they can change gears whenever they want. And I think that's so crucial. And going into a World Cup next year, that's such a good thing to have in your kind of like, in your department. So I think right now he's pushing the right buttons, but unfortunately, from now to the World Cup, England really aren't going to play anyone of quality, which won't help. However, I think we need to still take the positives that he does see from the teams he plays in front of you. I think you can see, and for him to already have impression after 2 games, I think says a lot. So I guess there's a lot of positives, and I think there should be momentum from these games as well.
Well, you've touched on a point there that I was gonna move on to, so I'll ask Adam. But yeah, it does. I was watching the Nations League semi-quarterfinals and stuff, and I was like, we could do with some practice against these teams. Like we could do with like a trial run. And I don't know if any of them are going to agree to friendlies. Like it does feel like England are going to miss out on something, and that we could, in the classic, typical English way, come into it and be like, we're unbeaten in the group. We're going to win the World Cup. And then the first time we meet a good team, we struggle. Like it does feel like England are going to be missing out on something. And how do you think Tuchel, there's nothing he can do to get beyond that, right? I don't know how you tackle that issue.
I think personally we've got someone that's quite humble and understands that maybe they haven't been tested. I think you're right to allude to the fact that these are the kind of things that you sometimes want to get tested against just to see where your weaknesses, your opportunities are, for example. But at the same time, sometimes momentum is a good thing at an international stage as well. It's not necessarily about pitting yourselves against the bigger nations. Sure, that will happen in knockout stages as well, I'm sure. However, sometimes it's all about the momentum, and sometimes that in itself can be enough to put those bigger nations off playing you as well at the same time. So I think, Tuchel will be very savvy and aware of those factors as well, but I'm sure he'll be broadly aware that this isn't a big test overall and that there will be tougher games for England. But I think this also opens up the opportunity for Tuchel to play around with the formation, play around with players, more importantly, and find that right blend. Right now, you saw it with the introductions of the likes of Jordan Henderson back into the fold and Marcus Rashford, and I feel this won't stop. I feel we will see more and more players being introduced as the season goes on. And I don't think we will necessarily see a formulated 11 like we always go into these tournaments saying certain players should be here, etc. I think Thomas Tuchel will approach this in a very measured manner, and he will know that there's certain individuals he can rely on, but equally there are positions up for grabs at the same time. So going into that tournament, I think the big thing for me would be the conditions, is how this group of players maybe adjust to that. And I think that will be across a number of European nations and potentially favourites for this kind of World Cup as well, is how do they adapt to these conditions? And we might actually see a tweak in terms of that style of football, because those nations, for example, that play a tenacious, high intensity style of football will struggle in those conditions. 100% they will struggle. And I think that's something that might play a part that isn't considered at this stage right now.
Yeah, if you're playing in LA in friggin' July,
that heat.
you're going to struggle. I think, so it's a very good point. But I like the point you made about there are positions up for grabs. I think Tuchel knows the depth of quality that there is within the English game and how he can pick certain players or find certain players that fit specifically to his system and not worry about the kind of like, oh, why are you picking him? I'm picking him because he works in my team, sod off, right? And I think we're seeing that with a few selections. I really liked the midfield in the Latvia game. Rice, Bellingham and Rodgers is a midfield I could definitely get behind. I think Rodgers is every time I watch him, I'm like, there's not many players that have the ability to run and beat a man with a ball and just cause chaos in the other team's midfield and defence as often and as consistently as he does. Bellingham being pushed more further forward and playing as the number 10 like he is and kind of putting that debate to bed. He's going to be number 10. You need to figure everything else out. I really like that. And then Declan Rice being that linchpin at the back. But then when Bellingham comes off, he has the right to run forward and maraud and become box to box, right? So he's giving them the tactical flexibility within games. I really like that midfield. I think maybe it sounds daft, but I think him picking Dan Burn, I really like. He's a huge defender. He's massive. Yeah. He's pretty decent. And in a tournament, if you've got a player that's like a wild card like that, and you think, okay, for corners for the last 10 minutes, you're going to aim for that lad and people aren't going to be able to mark him, pick him, call him up. You can just, all of these things, these like tricks you can have up your sleeves, the variety that you get within international football. I really feel like Tuchel's going to lean into it. And I'm kind of excited by a lot of the selections he's making. I really enjoyed Rashford's performance. I thought his end product was still a little bit not great, but you can see he's running with his chest up again. He's got a bit of confidence. Like Andrea, were there any players across these games that you were like, okay, I think we're going to see them thrive? Maybe even Reece James if he can stay fit, right?
Yeah, I was going to say Reece James. That is still my thunder.
Sorry, it's a habit now, man. I apologise.
It's a good thing for Chelsea as well. But no, I think... again, he knows him really well. So again, it's someone where you could see thrive as well. But I think the midfield, like you said, was quite interesting. And I think Morgan Rogers, I think in particular, looks really good as well. I think Eze coming on, getting a goal, a different type of player again in midfield that you can even put him in as that attacking mid, change it up. So I think that's quite cool in terms of what they have, the interchange they can have in the team. And yeah, I think you haven't said it yet, so I'm going to steal your thunder. But the Miles Skelly goal, Miles Skelly in the team.
What a boy,
Miles Skelly.
It was let's talk about him if we have to. It was an unbelievable performance. I got what I love about him. Many things, but I'm going to focus on one thing: is the fact that every time he's stepped up to a new level, he's just dealt with it really well. Like, he came into the Arsenal team, looked fantastic. He's been called up to England, looked fantastic. And you're like, wow, this kid doesn't get stressed by anything. And I think even like I said, kind of alluded to before, his link up with Rashford and Bellingham, and his ability to just punch the balls through for Rashford to run onto. Like his timing of the pass and his like pacing of the pass is really good. And even the way he won the free kick is something he does all the time, is getting his body in front of the ball. And Roy Keane said it at half time, like he's learned that at Arsenal, right? Learning to win fouls. But like his ability to use his body and shield the ball and move away is something that he's genuinely very like fantastic at. And I think that was a big, like when he did it, I was like, oh, that's classic Miles Skelly. That's classic Miles Skelly. And like, at 18 to already have that signature move is pretty mental. But Adam, obviously left back is kind of a position that England have been struggling with for a very long time. He's not actually a left back. Like he is a central midfielder, we need to remember.
Yep.
But for him, really, this is his position to lose now. It feels like Thomas Tuchel has only talked positively about him, said that, you know, he's a kind of unique player and it's impossible not to fall in love with him, etc. It feels like this could be his position, touch wood, barring nothing major happens, right?
Yeah, and it's certainly, like you say, he's not naturally a left-sided defender, but he's slotted in superbly. He's evolved. You could see by the way he runs in to get that goal against Albania, just that kind of confidence and assuredness that he knew what he was going to do in that game as well with those runs, because it would have been easy for him to have just had a solid 7 out of 10 kind of performance and just done what he had to, but he was naturally trying to bomb forward as well at the same time. I think it's going to be an interesting kind of position, so to speak, because I think that's always been a troublesome one, but it also seems to be the one that provides that balance to this squad. You know, the kind of troublesome position that England have always struggled with. I think the only competition that I can think of in my head, Rory, would be Lewis Hall from Newcastle. I think he put in some great performances prior to this kind of introduction of Miles Lewis-Skelly. So I think naturally that's good to have in this position. And it's going to be fascinating. But I think the fact that we're talking about 2 players that can now comfortably get into that position, and we don't have to worry about Luke Shaw's fitness is a kind of breather for England fans in general. So I think this will be an interesting kind of scenario for Lewis Skelly. Does he try and advocate to Arteta, this is going to be my position going forward, or will he want to be positioned in terms of the hybrid where he goes into midfield at the same time?
So I think next season, without getting too awesome, next season we're going to see Miles Lewis-Skelly as an 8. Like, I think that's going to be his position. So there's going to be an issue of whether, you know, he plays left back for England and midfield for Arsenal. There is going to be an issue there. But I think what I like about Lewis Hall and Lewis-Skelly is that they're very different types of left back as well. Like Lewis-Skelly's much more kind of go on the outside, your kind of typical wing back, left back kind of role. And then Lewis-Skelly's more your kind of, if you want to control possession, you can bring him into midfield. So you've got that optionality as well. So I think it's really interesting position for England, but I'm just delighted to see him doing so well, honestly. And but the slight concern is that I do know that because it's not his natural position, he is at some point going to make a tackle and get sent off. And that tornado is going to be an absolute shit show for all the gammons. So I am slightly worried about that moment that is going to happen at some point. Because the style he plays, he will lose possession at some point. Like the way he plays, he's very good at keeping the ball, but at some point he will lose possession when he shouldn't. So it'll be how he responds to that when it happens.
Let's call it out. He was already receiving it prior to this game as well. It's absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous.
A young black lad dares to have a personality.
He's not allowed to have fun, by the way, Rory.
Yeah.
So
no. And when Rasmus Højlund does the sue in front of Cristiano Ronaldo, it's banter and character, and you know, it's just so grimly predictable. And the fact that the FA had to hide so many replies on that Miles Lewis-Skelly post,
it's ridiculous
for a teenager walking into a room happy. It just sums up how miserable the majority of people are, really. But in general, a positive window. We can't be negative. Positive window for England. Positive for Thomas Tuchel. I'm feeling pretty good. I enjoyed those games.
Before we leave this, I wanted to also call out Konsa. Konsa, I thought, was really assured in that defensive duty. And I don't think we actually felt like we were missing Harry Maguire or John Stones in that position. I felt actually... I know we've had Konsa on previous games under Southgate as well, but actually I felt that he actually stepped up alongside Mark Guehi and Dan Burn. So Actually, this is an interesting dilemma for Thomas Tuchel. I just wanted to put that out there as well.
No, absolutely. I think you're right. The centre-backs, well, Gay was great at the Euros as well. I think people have kind of forgotten that he was genuinely very good at the Euros.
Exactly.
So it's good to see him continuing that. I think, maybe last thing, the Phil Foden conundrum. I think I've got nothing against the lad, but he's done nothing in an England shirt. I don't think he deserves to be picked at the moment. But do you feel like, Andrea, I'm going to go to you, do you feel like he's going to be crowbarred in at some point, or do you think it's just going to be Thomas Tuchel's going to be like, you have to prove to me why you get in this team? Because he's been tried at every position at this point, and it's just not worked.
Yeah, I think judging by Tuchel's word, he's got to get dropped at some point, because again, he's not going to, it's like you said, he's there for a short time, he wants to win, you can't take passages at this level, you need people that's going to make a difference. And again, he's quite predictable in his play out wide, cuts in too much, doesn't really take on his man as much, which is odd because he's very technically gifted and could easily beat any man with skill. So, again, I think it's something that might happen eventually, that he might look to. But it'd be interesting to see when Saka comes back into the group where Foden comes in. Does he come in sub, or does he get completely dropped when Saka comes back? So that's another question I think would be where we'll see for sure if he's got a future for now in the squad.
Obviously, I'm entirely biased, but I think that right wing spot is Saka's. That's going to be absolutely nailed on, but we'll see.